really are excited to be here. We both love coming to this conference and really appreciate the invitation to come. Contemporary lampworking, also known as flameworking, has a rich legacy ranging from scientific glassblowers to production crafters in cottage industries, from carnival workers to fine artists. In this brief survey, we've identified some highlights in the history of working glass at the torch. We've searched for evidence among major lampworking movements that advance the process and its perceived possibilities. We'll use the historical term lampworking that was in use until very recently. So we're interested in the questions: how did lampworking evolve? What kind of equipment and what techniques did our predecessors use? How were its secrets passed down through history? And what were some of the highlights or golden ages in lampworking history? And how are cycles in glass history relevant to us today? This presentation will cover a very broad range of lampworked objects. There is no comprehensive history of the topic, so we couldn't just go to a book and crib this. And our talk doesn't pretend to be one either. But we're both flame workers, which gives us a unique perspective into its history. It helps our own work to look back and try to understand the past. And it's useful to see techniques that are constantly being reinvented, like Murini and montage. First, a definition from Bondou Scott Dunham's book, Contemporary Lampworking. Lampworking or flameworking is the craft of shaping glass in a torch flame. The traditional name derives from the original practice of melting glass rods and tubes in the flame of an oil lamp. In modern times, glassblowers use a gas-oxygen torch flame to heat their materials. As contemporary lampwork methods have become more popular, they've been incorporated and blended in with other glass techniques. Nowadays, everything from tiny detailed renderings to massive architectural installations can be and are made by lampworking. Now, we think it's reasonable to expand on Dunham's definition a little further. Some historians believe the definition should include work in which any focused flame or heat source is used to soften glass for shaping. And with this extended definition, we see the evidence of lampworking techniques that date back almost to the beginning of man shaping glass. The term lampworking has been in use for centuries. The Oxford English Dictionary credits Robert Hooke as the first to use the term lampworker in his book Micrographia, published in 1665. He also describes the techniques he used to lampwork on a microscope lens. When lampworking in some form began is a subject for debate. Current research indicates that working and shaping glass hot is 4,500 years old. Casting and winding glass on a wire were apparently the first techniques. Core forming, fusing, and slumping followed. And there is evidence that chunks of pre-made glass was being made into beads after 1400 BC. But it's difficult to determine whether a historical piece was made by glassworking or lampworking. Experts today believe the techniques are often used in combination, just as we do today. At the top of a wood-fired furnace, there is a fluke hole called a stinger, where flames pour out. And Bill Gudnerath believes it's possible to lampwork in these hot, focused flames. To find evidence of early lampworking, take a look at these pieces in the Corning Museum of Glass collection, and you may hear me call it CMoG. Many of the details on this pendant with man's head, circa 400 to 250 BC, show evidence of techniques we would use in lampworking today. Look at the stacked dots for eyes and the curls of hair that are tiny mandrel-wound beads that are applied to the forehead. And again, it's suggesting a small flame was used. This first century container in the form of a bird is in the Corning Museum of Glass collection. And Bill Gudenrath believes the body of the bird was blown at the furnace. Once the piece is cooled and filled with perfume or cosmetic powder, the head was heated in the stinger at the top of the furnace to finish the piece. And you must break the tail to remove the contents. And we've got a video to show Bill working.
Different ways to make glass tubing. This is just one of them.
Thank you.
If you happen to go to the make your own glass department and make a glass flower, you actually do this. This is how we have visitors make glass flowers. But what's happening there, close to the end of that metal rod, is glass tubing is being formed. You see it being pulled off the reservoir, so to speak, at the end. The flower is irrelevant. That was just a way of freezing the edge. This tubing is about 6 or 7 millimeters in diameter. The wall is very even, makes very nice glass tubing. Now it's still hot. It's about 1,000 degrees. I reach down, chill the pincers, and tap while I squeeze the glass tubing with pincers. And the glass breaks incredibly cleanly and evenly. Look at the ends of the tubes when they come into view. Hot glass tubing below a diameter of about 10 millimeters breaks very cleanly. Now this is what they did after they made the glass tubing. They heated one end. This can be done in a stinger coming out of a furnace. It's kind of difficult to photograph it, so we reshot this using a Meeker burner. You can see what's going on a lot better. So if you look at the end of the tube, the glass is heating, and glass is doing what glass does. It becomes less viscous. Surface tension causes the glass to try to assume less space and become spherical. The end begins to close up. And if you look carefully, you'll see the end completely close. This, by the way, is exactly how I started glass blowing when I was 11 years old. I got a chemistry set. Here's the blowing. So there's the bulge. And the radius between the tube and the bubble is even like the Jerusalem finds.
Historical or archaeological evidence of lampworking disappears until the late European Renaissance, when glassblowing in Venice flourished. By the 13th century, lampworkers were producing beads and other items in Italy, and by the 14th century, it was widely practiced in Murano. The technique probably spread to the rest of Europe when glass houses were established in France, the Netherlands, England, Germany, Spain, and other countries. And a steady supply of low-temperature style cristallo and enamels in the form of shards, cakes, or rods became available. To obtain their glass, lampworkers were often located near a glass house. In 1679, Johann Kunkel published the first known description of lampworking techniques in the supplement to his German translation of Antonio Neri's book, Ars Vitraria. Eric will show a video of a glassblowing bench in the 19th, early 20th century, and you'll see that the table, bellows, and lamp described by Kunkel and used by lampworkers 2 centuries before were very similar to this.
So we have a couple of antique lampworking benches in our collections at the Corning Museum of Glass. One is the old bench of Rudolf Blaschka, who we'll be discussing a bit further along in this presentation. And the other is a bench that we believe was built in Bohemia in the late 19th or early 20th century. The latter of the benches we're actually able to use for research and for demonstrations. We put together a video to show how the bench functions. So lampworkers used a whole host of different fuels throughout different time periods and different cultures. Everything from oils like rapeseed oil, different animal fats, alcohols of different sorts, and even petroleum products have been used. The major keys to the bench are the wick, fuel, bellows, and the manifold. So a cotton wick works well. For safety purposes, we used isopropyl alcohol in the video I'll show you. The bellows has 2 compartments to it. The lower compartment pushes air up into the upper compartment as the treadle is depressed. And the upper chamber keeps a continuous flow of air pushing through wooden tubes that make up the inner skeleton of the table. So the tubes can feed air through 4 sides of the table. You can actually have 4 working stations on one of these tables. Any unused sides can simply be corked, and all the air gets forced to whichever sides you are working at. The manifold slides into the end of one of the wooden tubes, and as you depress the treadle, air is pushed through the flame. The temperature rises, the shape of the flame tightens up, you get more of a point to it. Proper aim of the tips of the manifold is crucial. When they're properly focused, you get a bit of a Venturi effect, and the flame temperature can actually get up around 3,000 Fahrenheit. So we created this video to support an exhibition of marine invertebrate models created by the renowned father-son lampworking team, Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka. So what I'm making in this video is actually a jellyfish tentacle that's made similarly to how they worked. There's a piece of copper wire inside of some barium-based neon tubing. It was the softest tubing I happen to have on hand, so it was pretty handy with the low temperature of the lamp. And you can even get an idea how cool that flame is as I try to melt off just these little dots. You'll notice the glass doesn't melt apart very quickly. I actually stretch it out quite a ways before it can melt right through. So that gives you an idea of how one of these guys can operate.
So lampworkers in the 17th and 18th centuries produced a wide range of products, as seen in this illustration of an elegant lampworker published in 1769. He's surrounded by a variety of wares ranging from barometers and scientific apparatus to glass eyes, elaborate birds, figurines, flowers, and centerpieces. In this period, lampworking was practiced by 3 different groups. So there are early scientists or alchemists that are creating labware for their own experiments, who then later became full-time glassblowers working for universities or industry. They're the cottage industries. Within that group are makers of novelties, figurines, beads, and imitation pearls. And finally, itinerant glassblowers. And we'll look at each one of these groups separately. For centuries, scientific glassblowing has been crucial for the development of chemical, pharmaceutical, electronic, and physics research. Scientists in the 1600s melted glass and created their own laboratory glassware. I mentioned Robert Hooke's book, Micrographia, published in 1667. In the book, he details how to make a microscope, a new invention, and he describes melting threads of Venice glass in a flame to make lenses for his microscope. Hooke also melted his own glass for thermometers and other scientific apparatus, just like many other scientists of his time, as shown in this illustration from 1716. Scientists have been studying tiny microscopes of Antony van Leeuwenhoek and speculating about how the lenses were made. He was a contemporary of Hooke. In 2016, the Corning Museum of Glass showed an exhibit revealing the invisible, the history of glass in the microscope. The show highlighted advancements made in science thanks to the development of the microscope. And this exhibit inspired us to investigate van Leeuwenhoek's possible lampworking and grinding techniques. And Eric is going to show you the results of some of this investigation by our museum team.
So it was interesting to discover that processes we contemporary lampworkers here would consider very simple and mundane. Well, they were actually key to some major advancements in the sciences. The first lens that Hooke describes in his writings is actually just a rod that gets pulled into a stringer. Stringer is melted apart, and we all know what happens when you start to heat the tip of a stringer. Surface tension pulls it into a ball, and that ball is actually a finished lens. So that was the first lens that van Leeuwenhoek was making. Seems fairly rudimentary to most of us nowadays, but it was a huge advancement. Now, the second lens comes from a blown form. So for this one, I used tubing, again, the barium neon tubing that I used for the Blaschka experiments. Again, it was the softest glass that I had around in a uniform tubing. So step one, like many of us do, pull a point. So I'll soften this up, get that point pulled. And from there, I want to adjust the shape of the hollow a little bit. Just get it a little more rounded out, thin the glass out a bit more. So again, this probably seems fairly rudimentary to most of us who work with hollows. So just inflating the bubble a little bit, rounding out the shape a little bit. Now the key is when you go to melt off that far point, try to keep that neat, and as you heat and condense the point, as you know, it thickens up, you wind up with a lens on the end. And so this is about as far as Hooke went with things, but I found that you can actually adjust the shape of the lens a little bit with the blowing process also. And we've got more research that we'd like to do on this topic. We have a few scientists joining us next week, and we're going to continue working on these old lens designs. So we'll keep you posted on that.
So Antonio Neri's drawings of an alchemist's laboratory from the early 1600s show laboratory glassware in earthenware vessels used in chemistry and distillation. This book of natural experiments, published in 1634, shows a variety of glass scientific instruments. It's difficult to tell whether they're lampworked or blown at the furnace, but it's obvious. Glass is an integral part of any laboratory. This book has been digitized, and you can read it page by page on the Corning Museum of Glass website. The link is on the screen, or if you get home and want to know more, contact the library and we'll show you how to get there. Followers of Galileo, the Accademia Cimento, produced some of Galileo's designs for scientific instruments in Florence, Italy, in the latter half of the 17th century and into the 18th century. Their products included the Galileo thermometer. Here are similar ones in this print from 1670 and a later liquid-in-glass thermometer in the Corning collection. From the 18th century on, scientific glassblowing manuals were widely published, often in multiple editions, and even the earliest lampworking manuals in the Reykjavik Library include directions for making a variety of both chemical apparatus as well as ornamental designs. However, these books were largely unknown among the more secretive cottage and itinerant glassblowing communities, as we'll discuss later. Neon signs are the offspring of the Geissler tube, which was invented by Heinrich Geissler, a German instrument maker of the period of about 1850. The Geissler tube consists of tubing bent into intricate shapes with an electrode sealed at either end. The tubes are filled with various gases, and when an electrical discharge is released through the terminals, the tubes will glow in colors depending on the nature of the gas with which they are filled. By the early 20th century, scientific glassblowing was essential for a wide range of industrial production, such as the manufacture of X-rays, radio tubes, and incandescent lights, neon signs, thermometers, syringes, and industrial and laboratory glassware. Furnace glassblowers at Corning Glassworks produced the first incandescent light bulb blank for Thomas Edison in 1879. And by 1926, their massive ribbon machine blew 275 to 300 bulbs a minute. But a lamp worker was necessary to assemble those bulbs into a finished product. In early incandescent factories, the hand lamp workers were responsible for almost the entire assembly of that light bulb. Scientific lampworking flourished in the 20th century, and the development of borosilicate glasses in 1894 made a new range of chemical ware possible. Prior to World War I, glassblowing schools in Germany trained lamp workers, and most apparatus was made there. However, the war interrupted the export of glassware. In 1914, Corning introduced its line of borosilicate glasses, and lamp workers, usually trained in the German style, worked in university and industrial labs throughout the United States, supporting scientists. Glassblowers continue to be an essential part of the research team and help problem solve as well as assemble apparatus. For example, every semiconductor chip is cut from a wafer that has been held in a quartz furnace tube in a quartz boat made by glassworkers. Today, scientific glassblowers make specialized glass apparatus that has contributed to the advances in industries and research in fiber optics, lasers, atomic and subatomic particles, communications, semiconductors, and medicine. In this field, some of the most complicated, largest, and smallest pieces of glass have been made using a wide range of different glasses. There are also many scientific glassblowers who make thousands of catalog glassware items for use by scientists throughout the world. These glass products range from beakers and flasks to specialized vacuum manifold systems and distillation apparatus. Today, members of the American Scientific Glassblower Society meet annually to share technical information. Their regional meetings, training sessions, and publications help them reach their audience. And we are fortunate that Salem Community College has been training scientific glassworkers since 1959. Dennis Brining, Joe Luisi, and have trained thousands of students for this field, not to mention all the other teachers as well.
Model making was another important use of lampworking. By the late 19th century, biological study was greatly expanding. And while taxidermy worked to preserve certain species for study, other animals, like marine invertebrates, were very difficult to preserve. The best way to study such creatures during that time period was to make an accurate model. Leopold and Rudolf Blaschka, a father-son team, became quite famous and prolific with their models of marine invertebrates. And they became especially renowned for the glass flower models they produced for the Natural History Museum at Harvard University. The Blaschkas were descendants of a family with a glass-making history that stretched back to the 15th century in Venice. The family immigrated to Bohemia in the 17th century, and Leopold moved his family to Dresden, Germany, after his son Rudolf was born. They worked out of their home, eventually making more than 3,000 models covering 164 plant families for the Harvard University collection alone. Now, they weren't the only model makers out there. There were other model makers around the world as well. Here we see Herman O. Mueller, a museum preparator for the Museum of Natural History in New York City. His family worked as glassblowers in Germany for generations, and he spent 40 years working on models for the Natural History Museum.
Now we're going to go back in time to the 16 and 1700s to explore cottage lampworking industries. Generally, glassblowers in cottage industries worked at home using lampworking benches that were small enough to fit conveniently in the corner of the worker's room. The father was likely to run the bellows for the rest of the family, women and children around the table together. The mother and older children were often responsible for finishing fine items. For example, they painted and silvered Christmas ornaments. Factory reps brought allotted glass to the workers' homes each week and picked up the finished glassware. While furnace glass was dominated by men, women often worked as lampworkers in the cottage industries, as well as itinerant glassblowers. Bead making has long been a cottage industry, and you'll notice women working glass in the flame in many of the old-time engravings. Families clustered in towns like Lauscha or Frauenau, Germany, and in Navarre, which is in central France. Lampworkers are still famous for creating exquisite glass figures in the 16th and 18th centuries. And while there's some records of lampworking in this area, in the mid-15th century, Navarre became a major center for glassmaking after Henrietta of Cleves, Duchess of Navarre, married Italian nobleman Louis of Gonzaga of Mantua, Duke of Navarre, in 1565. He took special interest in the arts, particularly glassmaking. He founded a glass house and brought Italian glassworkers to Navarre, including lampworkers. From the last quarter of the 16th century to the end of the 17th century, Navarre was the main French center of production for façon de vanille. They also manufactured enamels or colored glasses that lampworkers needed to produce their wares. And Eric and I had the amazing opportunity to study the museum's collection of figurines from Navarre, and we'd like to share our insights with you today.
Figurines made in Navarre may be single figures or complicated multimedia grottos. They're creche scenes and table decorations. The quality of the pieces vary from simple folk characters where we found our glass was often cracked and in poor condition, to fine figurines and scenes like this tableau by Navarre craftsman Pierre Hylen entitled Marie Antoinette Sacrifices the Heart of the Nobility on the Altar of the French Republic. The Metropolitan Museum of Art and the British Museum also have fine figural pieces attributed to Hylen. According to our cataloging record, Hylen was a member of a famous dynasty of lampworkers from Navarre. He must have made the diorama before the King Louis XVI, Queen Marie Antoinette, and their son failed in their attempt to escape to Austria in 1791. The royal family would be executed shortly thereafter. The lampwork figurines that were made in and around the town of Navarre, France, from the 16th century to the 18th century, have long been considered some of the early masterpieces of lampworking. There has been some debate as to how these objects were constructed, and we thought it would be fruitful to put in some extra research and development to see if we could recreate them. And as staff at the Corning Museum of Glass, we do have some amazing resources at our fingertips. Not only were we able to read about others' research on the topic, but we were also able to work with our conservation team to take a close look at objects in our collections. And some of the most revealing objects are damaged pieces that will likely never see the light of day in our collection galleries. So, what is the mystery exactly? Well, it's obvious when examining some of these objects that the glass is somehow built up over a metal armature. If we look closely with the naked eye, many of these figures have exposed metal wires peeking through. Many experts believe that the glass was applied to a metal framework such that when the glass may happen to crack, the metal would still help to keep the glass together. This seems to work well in most cases. We see many examples of cracks having formed in almost all of the Navarre figures in our collections. Well, in 1993, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City published a book on the extensive glass collection they had acquired from private collector Robert Lehman. The book covers a study of the Navarre figures in their collection, and it includes X-ray images of some of the objects. Now, the X-rays reveal the metal framework that had been suspected for many years, which would be sort of the brighter lines that you see through there. However, they also reveal some other bits of metal that appear to have been coiled or swirled throughout the sculptures. And it's really these odd coils and swirls of metal that seem to have confused some folks. Were these signs of metals leaching through the glass from the inner armature? Were these coils of additional wire to build up mass, and then glass was applied to the metal coils for the surface of the object? How would one go about applying the glass and metal together? As we explored the objects in our collections, and as we compared them with images from the Met's book, it does appear as though there were a few approaches to this combination of metal and wire with glass. We can't be sure if these variations relate simply to different artist or studio approaches, the improvement of their process through over 200 years of production, or some combination of those two. However, there does appear to be consistency in that coils of wire and glass were used to build mass for thicker areas of the sculptures. The smallest objects didn't require that sort of a buildup. As we look closely at a couple of our damaged figures, we could see quite plainly that there were coils of glass-encased copper wire built up around the central iron wire core. As we took a closer look at thinner appendages like legs and arms, we didn't see evidence of these coils. The surface layer glass was simply applied directly to the iron armature. Now, I've been plugging away over the last several months trying to get a grip on the process of how these may have been constructed. We did shoot a video of this. It takes about 30 minutes to get through the whole process, but we have shortened this to about 6.5 minutes. So most of the glass that's been tested in Navarre is of a soda lime base. So I began the process by having one of our gaffers at the museum pull me some tubing of clear glass out of our furnaces. We melt a 96 COE glass. I took chunks of color bar, pulled them into stringers to decorate the piece. Then it was time to prepare some of the stock of the glass-encased copper wire. So for that, I slide the wire all the way to the end of the tube, start to heat the tip of the tube, and once it's molten enough, you can simply pull it along through the molten section with tweezers. The faster you pull, the thinner the application of glass on the wire. The real trick is heating the right area of the tube to keep it molten, keep it flowing, but not overheat the wire itself, or you'll melt right through it. So these are my bits of prep, the iron wire and the encased copper. I then prepared the hands. Now, after several trials, I found it most efficient to pre-make the hands. In that way, I don't have to worry so much about keeping the bulk of the figure warm while I focus on finer details. And the hands are small enough that I can just sit them on the bench. They can sit out no problem. The wrists are thin enough I can heat back into them when I want to attach them. And with all the prep done, it was time to start working on the bulk of the figure. And when you get started, you have to go all the way through to the finish. There's no stopping. You've got to finish while the piece is still warm. And I found it tough to turn the iron wire by itself in my fingers, so I attached it to a punty rod, just attached it to the molten tip. And as you build up this base layer, it's just like winding glass onto a mandrel to start a bead. As the glass melts, it flows right on, and that copper wire is thin enough that it just goes right on smoothly with the rest of the glass. So we take a little time, get all that base material applied. Once the base material is applied, I touch up the shape a little bit, start to get it in the direction of the figure that I'm shooting for. So once that base material is applied and shaped, I can start to color the piece. So you'll notice that I work in a very specific order. I start at the bottom and work to the top. This order of process allows me to move the heat base in one direction. As I finish working on the lower body, it begins to cool. Once it's too cool, I can't go back with any heat. Otherwise, the piece shocks and cracks. I'm sure we've all experienced that. However, by moving the heat base in one direction relatively uniformly, the bottom cools evenly enough that it doesn't build up too much strain and explode, and I can get through the process. So as I add the blue glass for the upper body decoration, it's a balance between covering the mass of glass-encased copper wire midsection, covering the arm wires with glass, and then sort of blending the sections together so they look homogeneous. Some strokes of the blue glass are for building material, while others are to add a final level of detail. One of the biggest benefits to working the piece in this order is that I can really take my time working on the details of the head without having to worry about flashing the whole piece. And when I first began trying these, I kept running into problems where I was overheating the arm wires and I just melt them right off, just as I was building the coil. So as I got the hang of the process, it became less of a problem. Once you get that wire coated with glass, it's protected. You're not going to melt through it. I had tried bending the wire into the arm positions before adding any glass, but that also led to overheating the arm wires. They were always in the way as I was trying to build that initial coil. So I started bending the arms after adding all the glass and simply go back in with some heat. The wire's thin enough, it bends, when the glass is soft enough to shape that. So we get the arms into position. And once those arms are positioned, I can finish the ends of the sleeves, get those little rolled cuff details on there. And once the sleeves are finished, I can get the hands on. And you notice I work back and forth from one arm to the other. And I do that to keep the heat base all through the chest and shoulder area and along the arms, just making sure nothing's cooling down too much and we're not going to get any shock issues. So with the arms done, we get the hands attached. Then it's time to build material for the head. So just like you would for a bead, just wrapping glass around that thin iron wire, builds up material for the head. Then I have to put the collar on the jacket. There's no putting the collar on until the head's there. Otherwise, you just melt the collar off when you're adding head material. So we get the collar on there. And then I can move on to the details of the face. And again, I don't have to worry about flashing the rest of the piece. I can just focus all the heat on the head. The rest of the piece is fine. A couple of dots to add some cheekbone definition. Soften the front of the face. I can use tweezers to create the eye sockets and give the bridge of the nose. Then it's a little tiny stringer of black glass to add the eyes. And I always like to add a nose first. It gives me a sense of where center is. You guys who caught my demo today when I was sculpting the sheet glass, I do the same thing with that stuff as well. Just gives you perspective on where center is. So with the facial details done, we add a little bit of hair on there. And again, as I'm working on the head, I'm making sure none of that flame touches anywhere below the neckline. And that includes consideration of the hairstyle. I don't want to run glass down her back at this point. I'm just going to simply give her a little bit of a bun so we don't push the envelope too much. And we wind up with a finished recreation of a Navarre figure. Thank you. So, we'd like to show you a few more examples of Navarre-style works to highlight some of the variety of these objects. This miniature theater here shows the wedding at Cana. And if you look closely, you can see that it's made of shells, rock crystal, fabric, and pieces of glass. The heads and limbs of each figure are lampworked in glass, and they can be moved by levers and pulls on the outside wall of the theater. And the Bible story of the wedding at Cana in Galilee, the host runs out of wine, and Jesus saves the day by turning the water into 6 large jugs into good wine. Lampwork scenes like these were popular in the mid-18th century. A shopkeeper might charge a few pennies to set the scene in motion for public amusement. And this process wasn't just confined to France. Now, we see examples of similar approaches all across Europe. This diorama with Dutch Canal House was created in the Netherlands in 1803, later than the other objects we've been looking at here. And Beth and I are both totally intrigued with this Venetian goblet that was decorated by Dresden, Germany lampworker Johann Heinrich Meyer around 1720 to 1730. The pieces were created separately, and then they're joined cold with adhesive. And this particular object is from the Metz collection, but we also have a couple similar pieces in our collections back in Corning. Now, we've looked at one cottage industry area, but there are a couple others we'd like to cover. So far we've looked a little bit at Venice, we just covered Navarre, but we're going to get into a couple other towns, Gobelins, Bohemia, and Lauscha, Germany. So the town of Gobelins, Bohemia, it's now known as Jablonec nad Nisou, Czech Republic, was another major center for glass production in Central Europe. The glass industry there stretches back as far as the 3rd century when Romans occupied the area. And from the 16th century through the 20th century, this area was well known for its production of faux gemstones made of glass, glass beads, and glass jewelry. In fact, the industry grew so large that the factories were no longer large enough to fit all the necessary workers, so their cottage industry was born. Factories would produce glass rods and tubes, These materials would be delivered to individual crafters' homes. The crafter would lampwork the raw materials into the requested product, and the product would be picked up with the next delivery of rod and tubing. The biggest period of production in Gobelins was from 1820 to 1840. And according to government records from 1836, there were more than 10,000 people involved in the glass industry within about a 10-mile radius of Gobelins. 1,631 of those folks were lampworkers. And I'd be curious to see how that compares to Eugene, Oregon nowadays. Pretty dense population. All right, so the town of Lauscha is set in the middle of the Thuringian region of eastern Germany. This area is densely forested and mountainous, rich with necessary natural resources for glassmaking. It was originally founded in 1597 by a couple of migrant families of glassmakers, and it's most famous for being the place where the glass Christmas ornament was invented. But Lauscha has a long history of cottage lampworking of all sorts. That includes glass eyes for dolls and prosthetics, glass beads, and scientific labware. And Lauscha owes much of its existence to the glass industry. In 1872, there were 2,228 residents in Lauscha, which is only about a 4 square mile area. Approximately 1,242 of those people worked directly with glass. And many other residents worked in businesses related to the glass industry. Some were making boxes for packaging, and also plenty of salespeople for running showrooms. Now, the glass Christmas ornament was invented in Lauscha in 1847. They became a huge export product for the area through the end of the 19th century and well into the 20th century. Last year, we presented a program on holiday ornament traditions at the Corning Museum of Glass, and we created a video to show some of the basics of the process, and we actually use this as our holiday e-card as well. So, the Lauschians use either a 104 COE glass or a 90 COE glass, and the glass is made at a factory right in the center of town. The majority of the ornaments are blown into 2-part molds, and the mold material is a well-guarded secret, although I suspect it is a mixture of some amount of silica, plaster, and some clay. Now, the 2 parts of the mold are controlled by this rig that I took a couple of still shots here. So it will open and close the 2-part mold. You can see a foot pedal on the floor and the bit on the left there. The video, you don't get quite such a broad view of it. So, get our video going here. So, the 2 parts of the mold are controlled by a spring-loaded rig with the foot pedal to open it and close it. It's crucial the glass is set up to the right shape and temperature before you go into the mold, otherwise you're not going to fill it properly, you won't get all the details. It's also helpful to have the mold a little bit warm. And once the glass has been formed, the Lauschians use a few different potential processes for the decorating. They typically will silver the inside of the ornament with a mixture of silver nitrate, ammonium nitrate, sodium hydroxide, and dextrose. And then the outer surface can be further decorated in any of a few different ways. They could be painted, they'll often shellac the ornaments in a colored shellac, and then they add more surface decoration, gluing on glitter, feathers, spun glass elements, all sorts of different decorative elements can be applied with glue. And there we have a finished ornament. So pop out of here.
By the late 17th century, some of the lampworking families or individuals traveled with portable equipment doing demonstrations while they displayed and showed their wares. 1819 is the first record of an itinerant glassblower in the United States. By the mid-19th century, there must have been a dozen or more itinerant troupes going from town to town, entertaining audiences with demonstrations of lampworking. Scott advertised his splendid glassworking performance with his 1830 handbill. He entertained audiences spinning glass, modeling glass ships, and showing a moving glass skeleton that showed blood moving through the body. This illustration in a book by Adolphe Bittard shows women making artificial glass pearls and blowing glass at the 1878 World's Fair. Their wares, including the beaded necklaces, are displayed on shelves behind them, and everyone but the dog is fascinated by the glass-blowing demonstrations. Fancy glass workers and other troops displayed steam engines like this one throughout the United States. Imagine how the steam hissing and the wheels turning would attract customers to their booths and increase sales. And here is John Bachman with his steam engine, and he's working on a glass ship, and he has a Galileo thermometer beside him. After the Columbian World's Fair of 1893, circuses and carnivals with rides and sideshows provided venues for itinerant glassblowers. They became part showmen and part craftsmen. They had to be skilled at their work. As tourist attractions became popular, many hired lamp workers to demonstrate at parks like Disneyland, Disney World, Knott's Berry Farm, SeaWorld, Dollywood, and the Corning Glass Center. And they continue today. Glass families performed at state and local fairs and eventually shopping malls. Many performed for schools. Some lamp workers pulled a trailer which opened up into a ready-made booth for demonstrating and selling. Itinerant glassblowers had to belong to a family, even if they weren't born into it. Their knowledge was familial and proprietary. It was the old-fashioned apprenticeship program system in practice. There were no schools where you could learn the trade. Reading accounts by glassblowers and talking to them about lampworking prior to the mid-1980s, the consistent theme is secrecy, how difficult it was to find someone who could teach them the basic skills and tools of lampworking. Harold W. Smith recounts in a 1990 article in Glassline magazine, "In 1970, I stumbled into something that would change my life forever, the wonderful and exciting world of lampworking. The only problem was that I couldn't find a soul willing to show me what a glass rod or tube looked like. And if I did stumble into an artist, his torch would be turned off and immediately covered, discouraging my curiosity about the type of equipment being used." And I understand this was common among itinerant glassblowers. There were a few with a broader view. Gene Bouts led a lampworking family at the Citrus Tower tourist complex in Florida. His family could not make enough work to meet his increasing sales, so he bought glass novelties in wholesale quantities for resale, both from other American lampworkers and from Lauscha, Murano, and other European centers. And again, this could be a common practice. Bouts shared his collection of fine lampwork pieces with Shane Farrow, Ed Bigger, Fred Burkill, and other contemporary glassmakers who derived inspiration from them at a time when these types of objects were not in American galleries or museums. Bouts attended early Glass Art Society conferences, and he demonstrated there. Lampworking as an artistic medium has grown in importance from the late 19th century to today. In the 1890s, heat sources improved, preformed tubing became available, so larger, more elaborate pieces were possible. Once again, we can only hit a few highlights. So Karl Heinrich Florence Mueller is known for making one of the first X-ray tubes, and he founded a company devoted to manufacturing X-ray apparatus. But from 1865 to the 1880s, he made lampwork glass vessels in historical styles. His Venetian-style glass goblets were so accurate that years later, they fooled museum curators, including the Corning Museum of Glass, who used Mueller's copy of a dragonstem goblet as their logo. And in 1896, the Berlin chemist Karl Koping received critical attention with his Art Nouveau goblets. His stylized natural forms were inspired by the floral shapes of Venetian Renaissance glassware. Other lampworkers made artistic wares, like Friedrich Zeitmann, and by the mid-20th century, fine craft lampworking was prevalent in Europe, for example. Albin Schadel and others developed the montage technique, where the axis of the bubble is changed to create swirling patterns. In Czechoslovakia, Jaroslav Brichta's mastery was expressed in elegant lampworked figures. Born into a family of flame workers, Herbert Koch is one of many artisans who trained in Lauscha. And Vera Liskova was making lyrical pieces made of borosilicate glass. But the United States did not have a similar tradition of fine lampworking. Here, the public and the art world was most aware of itinerant glassblowers, making novelty items. Accordingly, it took much longer for lampworking to be taken seriously by most galleries and museums and collectors. That began changing as the studio glass movement matured and lampworkers were inspired to create fine art. Harvey Littleton's experimental 1962 workshop at the Toledo Museum of Art was the catalyst that brought furnace techniques out of the glass factory and into small artist studios. Littleton started the first university glass program for artists, and programs quickly spread throughout the United States and eventually the world. Harvey Littleton included a torch in his 1962 workshop, and we can see him experimenting with it here. But the studio movement was dominated by furnace glass blowing, and torches for any use were rare in the very early studios. However, there were artistic lampworkers prior to the development of studio glass. John Burton came to the conclusion that glass blowing could be done in a small studio at about the same time Harvey Littleton did. Burton was a metallurgist who made chemical apparatus, and he experimented to bring factory techniques to the home studio, working glass at the torch. He used small blowpipes and melted and blew glass. He experimented with contemporary shapes and colors, and his popular book, Glass Philosophy and Method, and his TV program inspired others to try the medium, including our own Paul Stankert. Often, scientific glassblowers had artistic business on the side. They worked at home on their torches, creating work that they sold at craft fairs. For example, Lloyd Moore was a scientific glassblower at the University of Nebraska. He trained using German techniques. He was an accomplished glassworker and also did artwork and teaching on the side. And he taught Sally Prosch when she was 13 years old. In the 1980s, it was difficult to find classes to learn lampworking skills. Colleges rarely taught lampworking, and summer programs like those at Pilchuck, Penland, Haystack, and Urban Glass were often limited. There was no artistic program at Salem until about 2000, but alumni like Paul Stankert and Sally Prosch did teach workshops. Now, we've chosen to highlight a few of the early lampworking teachers, people who inspired artists to use the torch to create their own glasswork and gave them the skills to do so. So Hans Goto Frebel, a German immigrant, set up a glass studio and retail shop in Atlanta, Georgia, to make sculptural borosilicate glass pieces inspired by nature. He continues to teach apprentices the German style of lampworking, and he was an early, he may have been the first, lampworking teacher at Penland. He gave the school a torch, they were difficult to get your hands on at the time, that artists used to experiment even when they were enrolled in a furnace class. Ginny Ruffner trained as an apprentice at a lampworking business in Atlanta and at Frebel's studio. She moved to Seattle, where she melds her education as a painter with her training as a lampworker and uses her glass sculptures as canvases for her thoughts. She was one of the first lampworking teachers in the United States and helped lampworking gain acceptance within the studio movement. Bandhu Scott Dunham is a leading lampworking teacher. Dunham is largely self-taught, and he's eager to share the information he collects from his research, experimentation, and exchanges with others. His text, Contemporary Lampworking, is now in its third edition, and has grown to 3 volumes. It's an essential source for beginners and advanced students alike. Brian Kirkvliet learned flameworking at Pilchuck with Pavel and Joseph Molinar and Ginny Ruffner in 1983 and 84. Then he packed up his minor burners and traveled throughout the United States to give classes in murini, bead making, and basic torch skills. When it was difficult to find classes, he brought the classes to you, and he was my first lampworking teacher in Corning. Sue Ellen Fowler was one of the Burton students. Around 1968, 1973, borosilicate glass had a limited and unsophisticated palette of colors available to the artist. Sue Ellen and a group of Burton students began researching chemical formula that led to an improved, though still limited, range of colored borosilicate cane. She continued working independently, developing her own extensive range of color formulas. She instructs students in borocolorant methods. And Paul Stankard's story is well known. He saw the possibilities of the paperweight form and pushed it into the realm of fine sculpture. He's one of the world's most recognized artists in glass. Paul taught one of the first lampworking classes at Penland, where his seminal class brought attention to lampworking. He helped found this annual International Flameworking Conference as well as Salem's Glass Art Program to open the art of glass to a wider range of people. Sally Prosh is a scientific glassblower in universities and a noted glass sculptor. She teaches worldwide, helping artists adapt scientific methods to their work while emphasizing a strong aesthetic. She's also a strong advocate for women working in glass. As a scientific glassblower, Sally takes blueprints or instructions from scientists and researchers to build apparatus to their exacting standards. And this gives her the ability to work with fellow artists who wish to incorporate glass into their artwork, but have no real interest in learning to blow the glass themselves. So these are some pieces she did for Jeffrey Schiff. And this is a growing trend in the art glass world. Many glass blowers and lampworkers assist artists. Italian and German lampworkers have had an enormous impact on American glassmakers, just as Lino Tagliopietra did for furnace work. German lampworkers Pavel and Joseph Molinar were among the first teachers at the schools Pilchuck and Penland, and their fine work influenced American glassblowers. Molinar's class in 1983 was the first lampworking class at Pilchuck. Ginny Ruffner taught the next year, and she and others continue to teach classes each summer.
Gianni Toso was convinced by studio glass legend Marvin Lepofsky to share some of his glass knowledge in the U.S. in 1979. Toso then moved to the U.S. in 1981. Lino Tagliopietra first brought Cesare Toffolo to Pilchuck Glass School in 1991. He returned in 1993 and has since taught at most of the big-name glass institutions all around the world. Emilio Santini moved to the United States from Murano in 1989. He began teaching in the US in 1996 and has since taught hundreds of students from all around the world. At the end of the 20th century, schools for glassmaking multiplied throughout the United States and worldwide. Diversification of techniques and widespread availability of classes opened glassmaking to a broader audience that even included amateurs. Artists may focus on goblet making, beads, marbles, paperweights, jewelry, glass pipes and paraphernalia, or other types of glass. As workshops became available, glass bead making took off. The International Society of Glass Bead Makers was formed in 1993, and the group holds annual conferences, exhibits, and publications to exchange information. Christina Logan's work epitomizes the skill of these flame workers. The biggest movement in lampworking today is pipe making, considered by some to be an outsider art form that has parallels to graffiti art. Bob Snodgrass is credited with sparking this movement. He began working with glass part-time in 1968, and in 1981 began to blow glass full-time. selling color-changing glass pipes that he fumed with silver. He moved to Eugene, Oregon in 1990, where he set up a glass shop, and Snodgrass then began taking on apprentices. His website shows an extensive list of apprentices, and they all have apprentices as well. Now, Bob originally learned to flame work from Chuck Murphy. He originally learned the craft from a scientific glassblower who had immigrated to the US from Germany. I think it's interesting that even within the pipe world, we see an original connection with Central European lampworking. Thousands of people are now creating lampworked paraphernalia in garages, basements, small sheds, and elaborately equipped studios across the country. The pipes have become more intricate and refined, with price tags even exceeding $100,000. At this point, the industry is worth tens of millions of dollars per year, and the work reflects the culture producing it: bright, colorful, intricate, and often psychedelic. For many years now, we've also been seeing some very advanced work being made by glass sculptors like Karen Willenbrink Johnson, Martin Janeczki, and Mark Petrovic, who gather glass from a furnace and or reheat their work with a glory hole, but they really achieve their finest details by incorporating the localized heat of a torch. And we're now seeing borosilicate workers like Alex Ubatuba, Marcel Braun, and Jason Howard really pushing the boundaries of scale by incorporating crucible furnaces into their torch work. It's almost as if we've come full circle since the earliest days of glassmaking, where the lines between furnace work and flame work are becoming blurred, and the techniques are being combined to take hot glass work to great new heights.
The lines between scientific glassblowing, cottage industries, and itinerant glassblowers were still strong well into the 20th century. But once again, the lines are becoming blurred today. Secrets are no longer passed from father to son or through apprenticeships. There are so many ways to learn about flameworking and to share information. At the Raycal Library, we've put together a research guide that's on the www.cmog.org website on the library's page. This screenshot shows you can find lists of selected books, articles, videos, and more. And flameworking is just one of the lists. You can find glass blowing, cold working, kiln working, coloring glass, for example. So all you students out there, if you want to learn more about a topic, check that out. They're not full text, with one exception. The glass blowing research guide will take you to 100 digitized batch books, glass recipe books, including those from Elsie Tiffany and Frederick Carter. The guides also give you links to our online catalog where you can search for additional library resources. And the library participates in interlibrary loan. So if you contact your library here, they will contact us, and you can get up to 4 books at a time. You have to read them in the library here, but it's really great to be able to do that. There's also a link to Ask a Librarian for help with your glass research. The recession of 2008 slowed the growth of glass studios, but not our interest in glass making. The expense of running a glass furnace and declining markets forced many glassblowers to close their studios, despite the introduction of green technology. Glass or craft galleries closed or changed ownership. However, other forms of glassmaking continue to flourish. So what does contemporary glass look like today? The Glass Art Society and Chihuly Garden and Glass sought to map current trends relating to the business of glass with a national study in 2015. The results were published in Landscape of Glass Art in America, a benchmark for the future, in November 2016. And key findings of this study include more than 70% of the public have an interest in glass. Of that group, 29% visited a gallery in the past 24 months, and 24% visited a museum that presents glass. Additionally, 23% connected with social media or conducted online research related to glass. The individuals whose interest in glass grew the most were between 18 and 34 years old, which is an indicator for future growth. Some of the key trends driving the industry are the increased use of flameworking by artists, which we found to be very exciting. Also, the prevalence of mixed media in performance and the use of technology in making artwork. Fundamental shifts in perspective were also identified. In the past, an individual may have considered themselves a studio glass artist. However, more artists are no longer categorizing themselves by medium and are self-identifying as an artist working in glass. Over time, artists have been focusing less on the technical aspects of glass and more to the artist's idea, which has accelerated mainstream acceptance of glass artwork. These results are promising for the future of glass and flameworking. If you want additional information, visit the official website at www.landscapeofglass.com. So by focusing on the history and on teachers, we're not able to show many images of the incredible work that's being done by flameworking today. So do explore galleries and museums that show current work, and please come to the Corning Museum of Glass and the Rakow Research Library to explore our resources. So thank you.